This is a point of confusion a lot, and I'd like to try and make it as simple as possible. And the best way to start with is that employees are the only ones that must have a Social Security number. So either they have one or they need to obtain one. So obviously if they're going to obtain one, we're usually talking about someone who's a non-citizen. Most U.S. citizens have a Social Security number. All other reportable payments, with our payment classification things, the rents, the royalties, fellows, we have to put a valid U.S. tax identification number on their tax statement. So all others must have a U.S. tax identification number. Those reportable payments must have a U.S. tax identification number. So it's important to understand that really, to keep this simple, the employees must have a Social Security number. Now, talking about the non-citizens, sometimes a non-citizen has a Social Security number. They may have had dealings with the U.S. in the past, and they actually have a Social Security number. Or they may have been an employee for somebody else. So within the process of inquiring, there's actually the Irs W7, which is a pretty common form, and the Irs W8 for non-resident aliens. But that asks for their official name, address, U.S. TIN, their tax status. So the idea is we need to have a U.S. tax identification number, and it's easiest to remember that employees are the only ones that must have a Social Security number. Now we're going to talk briefly about ITINs, and we're also going to have a testimonial of a person who has to deal with ITINs on a normal basis. So an ITIN is an individual taxpayer identification number. So as I mentioned, employees must have a Social Security number, and they might also have a Social Security number on some of the ones that are not employees. If the individual is not eligible for a Social Security number, the next U.S. tax identification number they would apply for is with the Irs W7. And when it's issued, that number actually starts in a 9. Now, it's very important that you plan time and patience with this application process. You might remember on the tools I showed on the web, I mentioned that taxpayer identification number section. There's a lot of information about how to apply abroad, different ways to apply for tax identification numbers. So it's important that you put time and patience into it, because it actually is a bit of a burdensome process and it takes time. Now we just wanted to touch upon Social Security number versus an ITIN. I had mentioned the employee has to have a Social Security number, but there are times, I've seen it with like fellows that are non-citizens who get a ITIN, and later they become an employee. In that case, they have to obtain that Social Security number, and the Social Security number now takes precedent. The ITIN is not the key number at that point. The Social Security number would take precedent at that point. This slide is to talk about something that happens on the government level and the information we send to the government. At the end of the year, when we accumulate and send all of our tax statements, we send files to the government which has the person's, for this purpose, name and tax identification numbers. So the IRS looks at that as a name-TIN combination. So they'll review the records, and they'll basically ask us or come back to us if there's a significant amount of mismatches. Kate was going to you'll talk to the idea of E-Verify.
Yeah, so we really don't see a lot of this activity on the payroll side for a number of reasons. We have had, historically had a process where we require a Social Security number, so you're matching and entering that Social Security number directly into payroll. That's a payroll requirement to ensure we don't have the mismatches. Now, with the requirement that the Research Foundation has to register with new employees with E-Verify, which you input Social Security number, and that validates the Social Security information directly in the Social Security database with the government, we really should be seeing zero of this. So I'd be surprised if we have any, Ned. I'd be interested to know that, but I would imagine we don't have any on the payroll side.
Even at the stages for years and years and years, because we do such a good job gathering that information, and the Social Security card is it's right there, the name and combination, we've never really gotten a notice from the government, I think maybe once in 20 years. And it's 4 or 5 that we're looking at. So it's got to be a significant amount for the IRS or the government to communicate with us. On the accounts payable side, not that we don't do a good job over there too, actually it's been reduced over time. We do get some mismatches, and those folks that are out there on the accounts payable side know that about every October, November, I get the notice from the IRS and we send the information out, and it's called a B-notice solicitation process, where they basically go out to the individual and say, our records show that there's a mismatch between name and TIN. Please send us a new W-9 or something of that sort. So they're analyzing the government's analyzing the 1099 reporting. Won't go into too much detail, but the 1042 side, I don't think the government's got that far along. So if there are mismatches there, they're not telling us about them at this point. But that's a whole other subject. So.
And of course, it's important for the employees to have the correct credits in their Social Security account, certainly. So it's a good thing we do well with that.